Hello, friends. I'm Rosie Acosta, your host and guide on this journey to self-discovery and radical love. I've walked a path filled with challenges. Growing up in East LA during the '92 LA riots, it left me searching for meaning, for mentors, for a way to truly understand the purpose of life. But you know what I found? The power of conversation. As a first-gen Mexican American, these conversations became my compass, offering insight, support, and an endless amount of inspiration. So I decided to create a space where we can share these conversations with you, our community. And that's how the Radically Love podcast was born. Join me as we dive into topics like mindfulness, spirituality, self-love, and the keys to overall healthy living. I'm joined by my dear friend, fellow author, producer, and teacher, Tessa Tovar.
Hi, I'm Tessa, and I'm grateful to be part of this community because it teaches me so much about what it means to be human. Ever since I was a little one, I was always asking my dad the deeper questions in life. Why are we here? What happens when we are gone? What is the purpose of life? I love this show because I get to ask the questions that cut right to the meaning of life. I've learned that no matter how much we want the path to be clear or straightforward, it rarely is. And that is actually part of the beauty that creates a radically loved life.
Please do us a favor, share the episodes you love with your friends, and leave us a review. Together, we'll learn how to create a life that's truly, deeply, radically loved. Let's begin.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Radically Love podcast. This is Tessa. I am so honored to be hosting the podcast today. We have a very special guest on the show, and I'm really honestly excited about this topic. Rosie and I had a little brief chat about the topic of death. I was just, before I hit record, was mentioning how I prefaced something with the word morbid. And I said, this might sound a little morbid. And Rosie was like, well, I love talking about death. So I want to address that topic today on the show as well. But before I do, we have a very special guest on the show. We have Alua Arthur. Alua is the author of Briefly Perfectly Human, Making an Authentic Life by Getting Real About the End. So today we're going to talk about one of the very special, kind of mysterious subjects, something that Rosie and I love to discuss, which is death. Alua is a recovering attorney and the founder of Going with Grace, a death doula training and the end-of-life planning organization. She is no stranger to the media. She has been featured on The Doctors and in Disney's Limitless docuseries with Chris Hemsworth, as well as Vogue, InStyle, The Los Angeles Times, The Cut, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Tessa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. So I want to talk about, yes, all things death, but I would love to. So I'll link this in the show notes. There was a podcast that Rosie and I recorded a few weeks ago where I brought something up and I said, this might sound a little morbid, the subject of death. And Rosie got excited. She was like, I love talking about death. And so I mentioned this to you before we hit record. And what did you say about morbidity?
I said morbidity means an unhealthy obsession with talking about death, but I think that talking about it, being in the conversation about it, not shunning it is actually really, really healthy for us to do. And so it's only morbid if it's unhealthily obsessed with it.
Yeah. I think that's such a helpful reframe for me in particular, and maybe for many of us, because I think that talking about death can be really scary. I feel like the older I get, the more I think about, I've been thinking about this all day, and, you know, in the coming weeks, as I've been thinking about getting to speak with you on this topic, how I get more worried about losing my loved ones and then having to go on in this life being kind of quote unquote left behind than I do about my own impending death. Do you find that to be true with patients that you work with clients that you see? Is that kind of a normal thing?
And just as people I talk to overall, absolutely. Because most of us have a fear of death. And many people will say, I'm not afraid to die at all. And I'm like, I get that it might actually be true. And also, what about the fear of grief or the fear of loss or the fear of your mom dying or your partner or your kids or something of the sort? That makes most of us a little uncomfortable. I think a lot of people often think, well, I won't be around for my death, and so it doesn't matter. But if I have to keep going after somebody I love dies, now that seems like a hill I don't want to climb. And understandably, I mean, it's unsettling to think of being in this world without the people that make living worthwhile. And our fear of grief and loss and pain are the things that sit in the center of that fear. And yet, I see many people keep going and find a way to make it just an additional day. We're incredibly resilient. And recognizing that resilience, I think, makes it a little bit softer.
Mm. I'm just so curious about how you sit with a family or a couple that's preparing for the end and address this topic. What is that like?
It's big. I mean, by the time somebody has invited me in, there at least has been some acknowledgement of mortality. So, as a death doula, I do all of the non medical and holistic care and support of the dying person and their circle of support through the process. When people are healthy, which when I say dying person, I mean anybody who's come into recognition of their mortality. So when people are healthy, I can help them complete comprehensive end of life plans. When they know what they're going to be dying of, we can support them in creating the most ideal death for themselves under the circumstances. And then after a death, I can help family members wrap up affairs of their loved one's life. So we're doing all the practical, logistical, and emotional relational support, which means, though, that people have to acknowledge that their dying will come one day. And that creates space for us just to open up the conversation to see, well, what do you need? What support do you need? What can I support you with? And then go from there.
Yeah. Well, so I had the pleasure of listening to a TED Talk, the TED Talk that you gave, Why Thinking About Death Helps You Live a Better Life, which went online in July of 2023, I believe. It's been very well received, over 1.5 million views, probably more now. And when you opened up that conversation, you opened with this description of how you want to die. And I was thinking, gosh, Alua has thought a lot about how she wants to go.
Yeah.
And I wonder, my mom kind of does the same thing. She has this whole scenario, and she's 76 actually this week. And I wonder about that. I mean, I wanted to hear about, what's that like for you to kind of daydream and think about how you want the end to be. And I think this is on my mind lately because I'm thinking about when I hear my mom tell that kind of same story to her, I almost have this judgment about it. Like, well, that sounds nice, but how realistic is it? And I'm bumping up against this weird kind of resistance to hearing her say that. It's interesting. I don't know if there's a question in there you can tease out, but
Yeah, well, I'm hearing a couple of things. First, the difficulty maybe of imagining your end, and why anybody would want to do that. Next, how challenging it is to hear somebody else talk about their end. Also, the improbability that how I imagine my death is actually how it'll be. So then, what's the point, or why do it at all, right? And those are all, but they make perfect sense. I think about my death a lot. I think about it sometimes because I've just been with somebody and watched life leave their body, and it reminds me that I still have it and that I can still use it while I'm here. Sometimes I think about my death because I'm doing something utterly ridiculous, like reaching too far for the towel in the wet tub, and just being like, oh, is this going to be it? And sometimes I think about it because realistically, my entire life is leading up until that point. And because of my death, the rest of my life has some meaning. So for me to think about it, to imagine it, does me a great service because it allows me to put some context around my life, to think about the beginning and ultimately the end. But it's the middles that's what makes it count, and that's what makes my death, I think, feel like, okay, we did the things that we wanted to do while we were here. And so thinking about it consistently allows me to create some framework for it. When I hear other people talk about their deaths, if I'm close to them, it pinches a little bit. But at the same time, I'm encouraged that they are thinking about it, because thinking about it and talking about it also creates space for us to think about our value system. You know, when I think about the type of death I want, it can tell you exactly what I care about in my life. When I think about my fears around my death, it'll tell you exactly what I desire in my life. And that all is really, really useful. That's the healthy part about thinking about death.
Yeah, thank you. I have had the pleasure of getting to read the book in advance, and so you do share, about your origin story, how you came into this work, what inspired you to write this, and I'd love for those that are coming to your work for the first time to just get a brief synopsis, or however much you want to share, about why become a death doula, and also what inspired you to write the book.
Sure. Yes, I'd love to share about that, because, I think people are like, why the hell would anybody want to do this? It is a profession or work that most people shy away from the conversation, and yet there's a solid crew of us that are running firmly toward it. I was a lawyer. I am a lawyer by training. I worked at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and I grew really depressed. I was living in complete misalignment with who I was and how I wanted to show up in the world. I was doing work that I think, for all intents and purposes, had a lot of practical use and, was noble and just and good. And yet, what I saw from the inside was how the systems of oppression served to keep people that needed access down and out. And it broke me, honestly. My sensitivity wasn't being used. I couldn't, employ tools or tactics or try to find different ways for people to heal. The work felt rigid. And while it was wildly important, it wasn't a good fit for me. And so depression blossomed. And I know we don't think of depression that way, but in my case, it was absolutely like a bloom. And it allowed me the space to stop and think about my life and what I cared about and why I was living, because it got me to the point where I didn't want to anymore, frankly. I took a leave of absence from work, a medical leave of absence. And during it, went to Cuba, where I met a fellow traveler on the bus who had uterine cancer. And we talked a lot about her life. And then I started asking her questions about her death. And she came along with me. And she was down to talk about what she feared and what she wanted out of her life and what she thought would happen after we died. And it was one of the most enlightening conversations I had ever had. And I didn't understand why at 34 years old, it was the first time I talked about the only guarantee of our lives, which is death, you know? It allowed me to think about my death and my life. And like I was saying before, create some context for it. I didn't like what I saw. If my disease of depression would have killed me, I wasn't pleased with the life that I'd led thus far. So I decided that it'd be really cool if people were talking about this all the time. Now, I didn't intend to take it this far at the time, but I was just like, oh, this would be a great conversation to be having, and it should be part of everything that we're doing. 6 months after I came back from Cuba, my brother-in-law, Peter St. John, my older sister's husband, became ill. And I got to support him through the last 2 months of his life. And being present for his death was a great gift. I got to care for him. I got to see the suffering that is actually present at the end of life. And it created a framework for me to bring what I'd been already witnessing in Cuba with Jessica into a form that could be useful for people, like support folks at the end of their lives. And so I founded Going with Grace, which is the end of life planning and training organization I run. And we've been doing it ever since.
Wow, what an incredible journey. And so I'm so sorry, I'm getting a little misty-eyed. I'm just thinking about, so my grandma passed away. I haven't had a lot of death in my life personally. It's just been very, my grandma passed away last year. She was in her late 90s, getting up to 100, and now my parents are in their late 70s, getting up towards their 80s, and I'm wanting to know, what are some ways to think about embracing this and my parents' end, those that I love, their ends, with that sense. What you're talking about is an appreciation of living life now while we're alive, and also embracing that the only certainty that we get in this life is death. How do we hold both? How do we hold both and live our life to the fullest every day? We really don't know what's going to happen in the end. And I love that you're talking about being with someone at the end of their life as I got to do this. This was a gift to me. It showed me so much. I witnessed the suffering. I witnessed the pain. How do we start to think about, I mean, it seems like it comes naturally to you. I'm sure that's a big overstatement. I'm making a huge assumption. But how do we start to embrace this and think about it for ourselves and with loved ones and live our lives to the fullest each day? Is that a realistic thing to ask?
I think it's realistic to hope that we do the very best that we can every single day and allow ourselves to be fully human every day. And I think that's how we get a little bit closer to holding both the invitation to live fully while we're here and the pain of loss and death. I'll often shun away from the idea that it's beautiful and exciting and like fun even to be with dying. Um, I find elements of fun in it. To me, it's really fun to be able to honor a life as it's ending. It's fun to be in the emotional depths with people. It's fun to hold space for somebody's grief and their sadness and their pain. I think that the way that we get to the place where we can embrace the end is by acknowledging, first of all, that an end exists, and next, acknowledging all that it comes with, and find ways to hold the duality. Somehow, through society and culture, we've kind of flattened the human experience down to the things that feel good. You know, the happy chemicals, the dopamine hits, the serotonin, the oxytocin, those are all spectacular. And yeah, what a rush when you get to feel them. But also, there's a lot of pain with being human. There's a lot of difficulty and confusion and doubt and insecurity and uncertainty. And death is a powerful, potent reminder of the absolute mystery of life that gives it like its rich texture. And in order to be human, we have to hold them both because they both exist all the time. And so to embrace our end, I think to embrace our humanness means to embrace the part of me that feels joy at getting to love another and the incredible sorrow and fear of losing them all at the same time. I don't know that we can live each day to the fullest. I think that's a misnomer. I think whoever it is that said that had this idea that we're going like bungee jumping and spending all of our money on vacations and like just eating like french fries and cake all the time. I am down for some cake, down for some cake. And also kale. Like I love a salad, let's plan a little bit for the future, not knowing that we have a future, but at least living like it. Let's take plenty of naps and rest. I don't I don't believe in like go 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 do get it all while you're here. I believe in being authentic to myself and to my life, and I get tired. I like to nap. I like to stare out the window. That to me is not a waste of my God-given time. In fact, it's an honor of it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Gosh, I have so many questions. So can I go back to the impact of meeting Jessica in Cuba? I was curious. You said this conversation, you talked about many things. What did you hear from her about what she thought about life after death? What happens after death?
She was very much in the question of it, which is a juicy place for all of us to be, which is what is it that happens after we die? And I don't know, but I'm curious. And for her at the time, she was a little concerned that she'd find out sooner than later because she was ill. She was not terminally ill, but she was sick. And we played a lot with those ideas and the thoughts like, well, what could it be? And what is exciting and what is difficult about it? Many of us are given an idea about what happens after we die. And I think it's up to all of us throughout our lives to reframe, to create a framework that works, that feels good, that feels honoring, rather than that feels like scary and awful, which is what most of us have conceived of. But since none of us know, why not make it really fantastically wonderful? Like, why not ride unicorns through Magic Land for all of eternity?
Yeah, why not? I'd like to
I
do
don't
that.
know. Yeah, I have no idea. Like, it could be anything. It could be anything. So with Jessica, we got to like parse it out and come up with some pretty fun theories.
Have you heard anything else from people that have really resonated with you or stuck with you, or that you really were like, yeah, I could see that happening. I believe that.
All the time. I think that my belief system is often informed by what it is that I hear, like all of ours are, but I have to do some digging to see what really resonates with me. And folks have all types of ideas. There was a client a bunch of years ago who said that she was very close. I think she died a couple of days after this conversation, but she thought that God, and I'm using the term very loosely, was a big eye in the sky. And I thought she meant like the letter I, like in the non-dual perspective of the I that exists in all. But no, she actually meant like an eyeball. And I was like, wait, like it's watching us all the time? Like, oh, I thought it was kind of cool, very different. I hadn't conceived of that before. And I thought, so what? You go back like into the iris, or what do you do up there? She didn't get clear, neither did I, but it was an interesting one to play around with.
I love that.
Yeah.
Ah, that's so good. Um, and then how about after, so being a death doula, actually, maybe I should ask that question first because you did speak to it a little bit, but can you define what a death doula is a little bit more in depth?
Yeah. So a lot of people think that a death doula is just somebody who sits around the bedside singing kumbaya and handing around tissues and giving hugs. But the work is a lot more practical than that. It requires us to be versed in the practical affairs of preparing for death. That means, all the stuff that we must plan to get our affairs in order on some level. We also must be versed in emotional relating and have comfort and some emotional depth because it's a really, really rich, ripe emotional time as somebody is dying. And I think that is no surprise to anybody who's listening, but it's a really ripe time. We also have to build our own personal relationships with death so that we can create and hold the space for other people to have theirs. There's no medical treatment involved. We leave all that up to hospice and hospice doctors. They do a great job with it, the medical care systems. But rather, our work is in holistically holding and creating a container where dying can occur in a way that feels most authentic and ideal to the person who's dying.
And do you ever work in teams? Do you have people go together for a single person that's passing on, or is it typically one on one, a death doula assigned to one family or one person?
It depends. Some doulas work in collectives. There are some wonderful death doula collectives out there where they will kind of tag team clients. I worked by myself largely, but then also there's a lot of doulas that I rely upon because I don't know how to do everything. And so I would turn to somebody else for support or where I didn't know how to do the thing or when I needed a day off or needed to go on vacation and somebody was dying because dying is not convenient. Okay.
Mm.
It's not convenient at all. It does not adhere to my vacation and my need for rest schedules. And so we rely on other folks like that. I think it's just important to get like a broad cross section of skills and gifts because that means that the people who need the support are best supported.
Yeah. Well, and in that same vein, the two follow-up questions I have, and actually where I was going to start with this was what happens after the person that you were working with passes on? Is then the container done and you're done working with that family? Like we started talking about, what about the people that are left behind? Is there any sort of bereavement, grief, processing post-death?
Yes, there is quite a bit. Hospices work with folks for 13 months after death, and death doulas often do some big follow up work as well. I think it's really important that we do because not only have we built up these beautiful relationships with people, we've been invited into like the most intimate parts of their lives and into their grief. I want to honor that relationship afterward. But also, an aspect of the services that we can offer is helping family members or the circle of support wrap up affairs after their loved one dies. Anybody who's been close to somebody who's died understand the huge bureaucratic mountain it is. Like calling Social Security and bank accounts and clothing and old pens that they keep and sock drawers. And, there's just like so many things to get done. So doulas can support with those tasks as well as support people through their grieving process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other question I have is about you. You mentioned it's not convenient. It doesn't, your vacation schedule. So how do you take care of yourself throughout that process post? I mean, I imagine there's an immense amount of energy that you put into it, emotional support that you yourself need during, pre, post. How do you take care of yourself throughout all of that?
Well, the role of the doula is really ancient. Like people have been doing this since all time. As long as humans have been alive, humans have been dying, and other humans have been supporting them through it because it requires community, which means that I rely on my community to take care of me through the process as well. That means that people will bring meals. I cry a lot. I cry a lot. I'm just generally very sensitive. But I tend to cry a lot of my emotions. So sometimes it's exhaustion. Sometimes it's just grief as I grieve with my clients and I grieve for them as well because I've grown close to them now. Somebody I care about has died. So I cry. I rely on my friends. I eat a lot of potato chips. I eat a lot of fried potatoes. Just crunchy, creamy, delicious. Something about the salt and the fat and the crunch, I think, really grounds me in my body. I try to take baths just as a reminder to wash off what is not mine to keep and to carry. I get a lot of hugs. I ask to be held. I've been learning and working on taking care of myself, and this work makes it really necessary that I practice that skill a lot. It's tough though. It's tough
Yeah.
because I want to be all strong all the time, but sometimes I'm just a delicate flower, and doing this work is difficult, and I need people to take care of me too.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious about the processing through crying and through tears. And I will think about this sometimes from the lens of being in therapy with a counselor who may cry with you, if you have tears. And was that something that was, so do you do cry in the presence of your patients? What is the correct term? Patient, client, client. Okay.
Client.
Is that, accepted in the field? Is it frowned upon? How do you feel about crying in presence of your clients?
I don't know what other people are doing, but I cry. I cry. Very early on, there was a client that I cried with, but I cried a lot. It was a client and her sister. I have three biological sisters. I could not help but put myself in her shoes, which is something that's like cardinal sin number one when it comes to death dueling. But it was early in my career, and I was thinking about my own sister. And I was weeping, and they were crying. And then I had to excuse myself because I was crying too much, and I had to go home because I was crying too much, and I felt so bad. I cried first because of the grief, but then next because of shame. Like here, I thought I was supposed to be professional, and I'm using air quotes around that. And then I was just boo-hooing through the entire thing, and I had to sit with myself for a while and allow myself space to have been human there. But a couple days afterward, after I'd beaten myself up real good, real solid, the client sister called to thank me because she said she felt that most people were coming in there just doing a job. And it was one of the first times that she felt somebody cared as much as she did that her sister was dying. And I felt a little bit better about it after that.
Yeah.
We got to be human. We bring our whole selves to the dying. We bring our whole selves to the bedside. And my whole self tears a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so healthy and important to let it out. Personally, I've been somebody who I think for most of my adult life felt kind of, and now that I'm saying this, I don't feel proud to say it, but I used to feel like it was a badge of honor that I didn't cry very easily. And lately I have been, and it just feels so good to let it out. It's just so, I think it's so much healthier to have the tears and let them come than stuff them down,
Yeah.
So we touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to come back to it and unpack it. The idea about, having it all, taking each day and living it to the fullest, the societal expectations of having it all, and the importance of living authentically. And I think when you started to talk about this, you were saying like the days where I need to take a nap, the self-care days where I need to slow down and just stare out the window. Can we define a little bit more deeply this idea of quote unquote having it all and the importance of living authentically?
Yeah. Yeah. The subtitle of my book is Making an Authentic Life by Getting Real About the End. Because to me, considering my death gives me space to just do whatever it is that I want to do with my life, like whatever it is that it needs in that moment. I think many of us have approached life, particularly I think in the westernized world, probably as a result of capitalism, where we have to have these really lucrative jobs that are also our passion, something that we feel really passionate about, and an excellent partner who it does all the things and is present and is great in bed and is joyful and gets us really well and is also our best friend and our adventure buddy and all these things. We're supposed to have these successful, bright children that do so well, that make us really proud of ourselves. We're supposed to have these toned and fit bodies and visible abs and makeup done and, just the whole shebang, like perfection as a human. And I don't know what that is. What I know is how I am doing it. And the way that I'm doing it is perfect because, first of all, there is no control version of me. There's no me that did all the right things along the way. There's no me that stayed in the practice of law or got married and stayed that way or decided to have children early or any of those things. There's no me that did things according to societal expectations that I can compare myself to. This is it, which means that this is the right way. This is the good way. This is the perfect way. I often think that this expectation to have things right all the time rids us of our opportunity to just do it the way that we would do it, as opposed to the way that my mom wants me to, or MTV told me to when I was 15. People don't watch MTV anymore, but you know what I mean, right? I think you know what I'm talking about.
I do. I know
Okay, good.
MTV.
You know what I'm talking about. MTV told
Yeah.
me, yeah, and Cosmopolitan Magazine and 17, you know,
Yes.
they told me a way to be when I was younger and a way to do things, and I didn't. I fell short every single time, and that made me feel bad about myself a lot. It made me look for validation in ways that of things that were outside of me. It made me create success in a particular metric that is not authentic to who I am. My success doesn't look like my degrees or my bank account. It looks like presence and it looks like connection and it looks like authenticity and it looks like grace. That's what success looks like to me. Um, yeah. And my death reminds me of that constantly. My death is my greatest teacher about all of that. I'm gonna be the only one that's there. My death is gonna be one-on-one, me on me. Granted, people might be around, the people that I love, but I'm the one who's got to journey through it. I'm the one who's got to reconcile every single choice I made. I'm the one who's going to have to say, I chose the partner that I wanted to. I did the work that I wanted to. I wore the clothes I wanted to. I ate the things I wanted to. I lived in the body I wanted to. And I feel good about that.
So do you think about, do you ever have the conversation with yourself where you're on your deathbed asking yourself about your regrets? If you have any, what would they be in that conversation? I mean, that's kind of what I heard you just say was a little bit like, well, I'm the one that has to, understand that I'm making these decisions and my life is as a result of I did this, I did that. And so do you think about that in terms of, if I were, on my deathbed at whatever age, looking back, would I regret this?
Yeah. What you're talking about is the deathbed test. And this is how I frame it. The deathbed test asks me to think about any current actions I'm going to take, future cast myself to my deathbed, and think for a moment on my deathbed, will I be glad I did this thing? Will I be mad I didn't do it? Or will it even matter? And 90% of the time, it won't matter. So do whatever you want. You know? But sometimes it does matter. Sometimes it can encourage me to, break up with somebody. or try an extra day, or attack the conversation with a little bit more vulnerability, or take a job or quit a job or start a new venture, or don't, or write a book, or give up because it got too hard. The deathbed test can really create some context for the decisions that we make.
Yeah.
Yeah, and help us also parse through the things that we might regret. But I find that people often just regret the things that they didn't do, not the things that they did.
Yeah. I always wonder about that too. I've heard that statistic before, is it's usually I didn't spend enough time with my kids. I didn't show my love freely enough. I worked too much. I played too little, that kind of thing. Is there
Absolutely.
anything else that kind of has surprised you about what you hear about regrets, or?
Not surprised necessarily, because it's in the same vein of not living authentically. And I think the last one of the ones that you mentioned that is really couched very solidly is I didn't live a life authentic to me. That
Mm,
kind of covers it all. Like I did the things that I thought I was supposed to do, or I was chasing illusory goals, but I wasn't real.
mm.
Yeah.
I wonder how we reconcile that when we realize maybe it's too late. What do you think the lesson in that is? Is there one? Is there any meaning behind it? It feels so sad to me to think we get to the end and we realize all of these things we thought we were doing quote unquote right, we have regrets about. Is there anything
Yeah.
left to be done?
Well, I think as long as there's still breath, there's something to be done. Often I find the regret is around relationships. People didn't say the things that they wanted to say or didn't express themselves. And so I've certainly worked with folks that have at the last, the final hour, been trying to get in touch with somebody that they cared about. Or I worked with a client where we had to eke out a letter 2 days before she died to her kids who had chosen not to be there with her anymore. I think as long as there's breath, there's still something. And that also sometimes means that it's the time for us to practice surrender into exactly what we did, forgiveness of self for the things that we didn't do, and grace. And, this concept of grace is the thing that overrides it all. That I did what I could with the time that I had, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think about gratitude playing into this entire conversation? Has that subject, that topic changed for you over time?
A little bit. I'm hesitant to call gratitude like a key for many things. I think it can be like, if I can be grateful for my life, we're doing really great. But also, it's hard sometimes to be alive and to be human. And no matter how often I get to be with folks as they are dying, and it gives me a lot of compassion for the human ride, I can still get really frustrated when I'm standing in line at CVS and the cashier is taking too long. Yeah, at that point, gratitude that I have the money to be able to buy the things, and I'm able-bodied enough to be in charge of like the pharmacy items I'm getting, and also hurry up, like those things are all present also.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, a lot of gratitude for life, gratitude for the day to day, gratitude for my breath, gratitude for the trillions of functions that my body is undertaking at this very moment without my conscious awareness of. Big gratitude, big gratitude. And sometimes it gets lost in the day to day and in the anxiety and the fear and the worry.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay for it to get lost sometimes. I think we're so hard on ourselves. We touched on the subject of perfection, and I think yeah, all those things you were saying about how we think we're supposed to have the abs and the beautiful body and this perfectly efficient laid out schedule and be in a lucrative job and all that. That's how it's just not realistic. We put so much pressure on ourselves to show up like that. Do you think that's a cultural thing? Is it our society? Is it a human thing? Is it the world at large? Where does that
I
come
think
from?
I think it has a lot. I think it's capitalism. I think it's industrialization. I think it's a very Western way of thinking that is bleeding out into the rest of the world. But I think it has a lot to do with the culture that we live in. Another one that we didn't even touch on that really is getting my goat lately is having like a super clean house all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I'm messy, man. I'm messy. I know where everything is, but it's everywhere. And that's okay. I give myself so much stress about having a messy house sometimes. That's not fair to me.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Or if your partner is, so I'm also the messy one, but my partner is very clean, and for him it seems like it's a little borderline. It's a control thing and it's a self-soothing mechanism. So we kind of butt heads over that, and I can, yes. I don't know. I remember when I was young, my mom always said something about the messiness being a reflection of what was on the inside. And I always kind of felt like if I'm seeing mess around me, that must be reflecting on my person somehow. So I took that very hard, I guess. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, oh, there's some shame around that. But I appreciate what you're saying, that, can we back off a little bit on this perfection? Everything doesn't have to be in its place. I know where my things are, and that's enough. That's
Yeah.
enough.
Let's back off of ourselves a lot. Death constantly teaches me. It humbles me. It humbles me that there is this great mystery. I have the tiniest bit of time while I'm here, and I'm going to worry about the stack of papers on the corner of my dresser. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What does it mean about me? Nothing. Just that I didn't get to it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
love
it.
that. Thank you. I want to ask you two final questions. One is about the ethos of the podcast, Radically Love, the belief that you and I, everyone, we are all radically loved by whatever higher power of our understanding, whatever you want to call it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a higher power, but that you are in some way radically loved. And so Rosie will often ask that as a two-part question. Number one, what do you radically love? And number two, how do you feel radically loved? And so if you'd like to answer both, you can. If you'd like to choose one or the other, absolutely fine too.
I radically love life. I do. And to me, to radically love it means to love its end as well. Because I can't say I love something and not love it all the way through. My life also includes the end of it. And I must love that part too. Otherwise, it's not love, Otherwise, it's very conditional. I radically love the messiness. I radically love my depression, mosquitoes, the whole ride for all that it is. Because it is really a miracle when I think about it, when we spend any time to stop and take it in. The absolute perfection in nature and in my body and being able to talk to each other. And also the greed and the pain and the egocentrism of humans also. Like, we got to love it all. All. I can't remember the second part of the question.
How do you feel radically loved?
I feel radically loved when I'm given the grace to be my messy human self.
Yes. Yes. And one final logistical question is, where do you like to connect with people most on the socials? Where can people go to find out more about you?
They can come to Instagram if that's your jam. We're at going_with_grace, or me personally is Alua Loves Life. The website is a great place to find us as well, goingwithgrace.com. And you can find retreats and workshops and classes and meditations and videos and just stuff to think about mortality and care for other people.
Oh, thank you so much, Alua. I could sit here and talk with you all day. I'm so grateful for you being in this world, doing the work that you do, and also for sharing it with our community, with the Radically Loved community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tessa. This has been really fun.
Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to the Radically Loved podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. Also, don't forget to check out the Mindful Love Hub on Substack. This episode was produced by Tessa Tovar, music by DJ Taz Rashid.